The year is 793 AD. Off the northeastern coast of England, an ominous sight emerges from the morning mist. Longships with towering, dragon-headed prows, their hulls cutting through the churning sea with eerie silence. These vessels, built for both speed and stability, are unlike anything the Christian world has encountered before. Inside, seasoned warriors, hardened by battle and the brutal conditions of the north, grip their weapons. They are not an army in the traditional sense. No king commands them, no empire sends them. They are Vikings, raiders from the cold and unforgiving lands of Scandinavia, driven by ambition, survival, and the pursuit of wealth. For centuries, the monasteries of England have stood untouched, their riches accumulating under the belief that they are protected by God's divine will. But the Norse do not fear this god. They worship Odin, Thor, and Freya, gods of war, fate, and conquest. To them, battle is sacred, and the spoils of war are theirs by right. The target is Lindisfarne, a small but wealthy monastery on the coast of Northumbria. Inside, monks move about their daily routines, copying sacred texts, ringing church bells, tending to the sick and the poor. They are unaware that history is about to change forever. The first warning comes too late. The rhythmic pounding of oars against the sea, the growing shadow of sails blotting out the horizon. Then, the sound of splintering wood as the Vikings run their ships aground and storm the shore. The doors of the monastery are no match for axes wielded by men trained for war since childhood. As the walls crumble, so too does the illusion of safety. The attack is swift and ruthless. The monks, unarmed and defenseless, have no chance against the seasoned warriors clad in leather, chainmail, and fur. Some are cut down where they stand, others are dragged away as slaves, bound and beaten, their fate sealed in the slave markets of Scandinavia or the Middle East. The golden chalices, silver crosses, and illuminated manuscripts, treasures gathered over generations, are stripped away in minutes. Outside, the village burns, its people either slain or taken captive. By the time the longships push back into the sea, Lindisfarne is in ruins. What was once a peaceful place of worship is now a graveyard, a warning, and the beginning of a new era. The Viking Age has begun. This was not an isolated event. It was the first wave of a centuries-long movement of conquest, settlement, and exploration that would reshape the political and cultural landscape of Europe. Who were these warriors? What drove them to raid, conquer, and settle lands from England to the Middle East? And how did they rise to become one of history's most feared and legendary forces? This is their story. The Viking Age was a period of profound transformation, warfare, and exploration that lasted from 793 to 1066 AD. It began with the infamous raid on Lindisfarne and ended with the death of Harald Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But the Vikings were much more than just raiders. They were explorers, traders, settlers, and empire builders, leaving an indelible mark on history. But who were the Vikings, really? The answer is more complex than popular culture suggests. The term Viking does not refer to a specific ethnic group or nation. Instead, it comes from the Old Norse word vikinga, meaning raider or pirate. Not all Norsemen were Vikings, and not all Vikings were warriors. Many were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. Yet, during this time, thousands of Scandinavians embarked on raiding and trading expeditions that would change the political and economic landscapes of Europe, the Middle East, and even North America. The Vikings did not wear horned helmets. This is one of the most persistent myths, largely due to 19th century Romanticism and Wagnerian opera. In reality, Viking warriors wore simple iron helmets, often with nose guards, or relied on chainmail and leather armor. They were also not just mindless barbarians. Viking society was highly organized, with a structured legal system, complex trade networks, and a deep-rooted sense of honor and loyalty. Unlike many medieval societies, Viking women had considerable rights, including the ability to own land, divorce their husbands, and wield political influence. Their religion and mythology were equally intricate, centered around gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, whose stories shaped their worldview and influenced their approach to war, exploration, and death. The concept of Valhalla, an afterlife reserved for warriors who died in battle, further fueled their fearlessness in combat. Viking activity was driven by three key forces: raiding, the most famous aspect of the Viking Age. Warriors targeted monasteries, towns, and villages across Europe, using swift longships to strike and disappear before organized resistance could form. Trade. The Vikings established vast trade networks, exchanging goods as far as the Byzantine Empire, the Middle East, and Central Asia. They traded furs, amber, walrus ivory, and even slaves in return for silver, silk, and exotic goods. Settlement and expansion. While some Vikings focused on raiding, others settled Iceland, Greenland, and even North America. They also founded Kievan Rus', the precursor to Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, controlled parts of England, and became elite warriors in the Byzantine Empire. This mix of warrior culture, economic ambition, and relentless exploration made the Vikings one of history's most influential civilizations. While their raids and conquests often strike fear in the hearts of those who study them, the Vikings were not just destroyers. Their legacy is not only written in the battles they won, but in the settlements they built, the cultures they influenced, and the complex societies they created. From their impact on the English language to the formation of kingdoms in Scandinavia, from their integration into the Byzantine Empire to their explorations across the Atlantic, the Vikings left a lasting imprint on the world that echoes in many aspects of modern life. The Viking Age may have ended with the fall of the last great Viking kings, but the spirit of exploration, the drive for independence, and the thirst for adventure that defined them still resonates in our world today. The Vikings hailed from the cold, harsh lands of Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. This region is defined by rugged terrain, steep mountains, dense forests, and the fjords, deep, glacially carved valleys that stretch into the coastlines. These natural features not only shaped the Viking people's physical environment, but also influenced their way of life, their skills, and their worldview. Scandinavia's geography made it difficult to cultivate large areas of land or develop vast agricultural societies. The land was hard and the weather colder than most of Europe, forcing early Norsemen to adapt in ways that would make them uniquely suited to become some of the greatest warriors and explorers of the medieval world. The climate and landscape of Scandinavia contributed to a sense of isolation that forged the early Viking mentality. Norway's rugged coastline, with its countless islands and fjords, created natural harbors for longships, allowing for swift and stealthy maritime operations. Norway, especially, was almost entirely mountainous, and most of the land that was not covered in forest or snow was jagged and rocky, leaving little space for large agricultural settlements. In these harsh conditions, resources were scarce, and survival demanded adaptability, resourcefulness, and daring. To the east, Sweden was mostly flat, with vast forests and rivers, making it a central hub for trade and travel. Its rivers connected it to both the Russian plains and Byzantine Empire, contributing to the Vikings' expansion eastward, particularly through the establishment of Kievan Rus. Denmark, the smallest of the three countries, was more hospitable for farming, but still constrained by geography. It provided the Vikings with fertile land for cultivation, but its importance lay in its access to both the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, acting as a crucial crossroads for Viking trade and raids. This unique geography and environment meant that survival was a constant struggle. The harsh winters, limited agricultural potential, and isolation forced the people of Scandinavia to develop fierce independence and expertise in seafaring and combat, qualities that would later define Viking culture. Before the Viking Age began, the Scandinavian peoples were primarily organized into tribal societies. These tribes were governed by local chieftains and were often bound by kinship ties, with families living together in communal villages. Leadership was usually inherited, but it was not absolute. A chieftain's power relied on his ability to maintain loyalty through skill in battle, generosity, and charisma. While Viking society was tribal in structure, there was also a growing trend toward centralized rule. In time, several powerful chieftains would come to dominate their regions, uniting surrounding tribes through alliances, military conquest, or marriage. This led to the formation of the early Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish kingdoms that would later come into conflict with one another and other European powers. At the heart of Viking society was the Thing, an early form of democratic assembly. Here, free men gathered to make decisions about laws, resolve disputes, and discuss matters of war and governance. Though the Thing was not a representative democracy in the modern sense, it allowed the people to participate in the decisions that directly affected their lives. These assemblies were vital to maintaining order in a society where honor and reputation played a significant role in every decision. The Norse people had a complex and deeply ingrained religious system centered around gods such as Odin, the god of wisdom and war, Thor, the thunder god, and Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and battle. These gods were not abstract figures of worship, but active forces in the lives of Vikings, influencing their decisions and actions. The Vikings believed their gods were directly involved in the struggles of daily life, from war to farming, and this connection was critical in shaping Viking culture. The Viking worldview was polytheistic, with gods, giants, and spirits all playing a part in the fate of humanity. Odin, the chief god, was associated with wisdom, magic, and war. Vikings believed Odin led them into battle, guiding their fates and ensuring they earned a place in Valhalla, the great hall of the slain, where warriors who died in battle would feast and fight until the end of the world, Ragnarok. Viking belief in the Wyrd, a concept of fate or destiny, was also central to their mentality. Warriors believed that their fate was already sealed by the gods, and that the only way to influence their fate was to fight with honor. This sense of inevitability in life and death spurred the Vikings' bravery in battle, as they believed their honor in life would determine their place in the afterlife. Although the Vikings are most often remembered for their violent raids, they were also skilled traders and explorers. Long before their infamous raids began, Scandinavian traders were already making contact with civilizations across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The Vikings played a significant role in the early formation of trading networks that stretched as far as Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and Baghdad. In addition to the wealth brought by raiding, the Vikings traded amber, furs, walrus ivory, and slaves in exchange for silver, silk, and wine. These trade routes helped foster connections between cultures, and through these interactions, the Vikings learned advanced skills in shipbuilding, metalwork, and sailing, all of which would be crucial to their future success. The Vikings were also instrumental in the establishment of the Kievan Rus, an early medieval state that would eventually give rise to the Russian Empire. Through their interactions with Slavic tribes and Byzantine merchants, the Vikings helped to spread their cultural influence far beyond Scandinavia. Viking society was unforgiving, and life from birth was full of risks. Childbirth was dangerous, with high mortality rates, especially in the harsh climates of Scandinavia. Newborns had to be strong to survive, and only the fittest would make it through the early stages of life. Infant mortality rates were high, but those who survived the early years were molded by a culture that valued strength, resilience, and the ability to adapt to their environment. Family life revolved around practical survival, with children raised to contribute from a young age. Children were expected to learn from their parents, adopt skills in combat and survival, and master the basics of seafaring. From an early age, boys trained with small weapons like wooden swords and spears, and girls learned skills like weaving, farming, and running a household. Vikings believed in the power of oral tradition to pass down history, values, and practical skills. Stories, myths, and legends were not just entertainment, they were educational tools shaping the Viking identity. The sagas, Epic tales of gods, heroes, and past warriors were passed down through generations, teaching lessons of honor, bravery, and the importance of maintaining family legacy. Boys and girls learned these stories early on, and many were expected to memorize them, ensuring that the history of their ancestors lived on. As they grew older, young Vikings underwent rigorous training in combat. This was not just a matter of physical strength, but also about discipline, tactics, and mastering the intricacies of their weapons. Weapons such as swords, axes, and spears were a young Viking's tools of survival. The training was relentless, and only those who excelled could be considered warriors. Even in childhood, Viking boys were taught the basics of combat, often practicing in mock battles with their peers. The legendary shield wall was one of the most iconic formations used by the Vikings in battle. Young warriors practiced the art of forming a solid wall of shields, locking together in perfect unison to create an impenetrable barrier. This formation allowed the Vikings to hold their ground in battle, moving as a single, cohesive unit. Combat drills were essential, as the Vikings knew that teamwork and coordination would often decide the outcome of battle. As young men, Vikings were expected to prove themselves through trial by combat. This was the ultimate rite of passage, a test of courage, strength, and honor. Combat was often the only way to settle disputes or to gain the respect of peers and elders. A Viking's reputation was everything, and a loss in battle could mean a loss of status, while victory brought glory and the potential for greater leadership opportunities. Viking society was rigidly hierarchical, with each individual's position largely determined by birth, wealth, and skill. The highest rank in Viking society was that of the Jarl, the noble class, and often the leaders of clans or tribes. The Jarls were warriors, landowners, and chieftains who held power over large swaths of land and people. They often led raids, oversaw settlements, and had a significant influence on the political landscape of Viking territories. Beneath the Jarls were the Carls, the free men who made up the majority of Viking society. These included farmers, traders, and warriors who held a degree of freedom and could own land. The Carls were the backbone of Viking society, working the land and performing the essential tasks that kept the community functioning. However, despite their freedom, Carls were often expected to serve as warriors when needed, and would be called upon to fight alongside the Jarls in times of war. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were the thralls, or slaves. Thralls were typically prisoners of war or individuals born into servitude. While they had few rights, thralls were essential to Viking life. They performed tasks such as working the land, building longships, and serving the higher classes in domestic and manual labor. They had little freedom and were often treated harshly, but they could sometimes earn their freedom through exceptional service, or in rare cases, be released by a generous master. The role of women in Viking society is often misunderstood. While many people assume that Viking women were passive, they actually had more rights than women in many other contemporary societies. Viking women had the ability to own land, manage households, and divorce their husbands if necessary. While the highest roles were dominated by men, women could wield power within their own families and clans. They were seen as strong, capable individuals who contributed to the success of the Viking way of life. Women in Viking society were also vital to maintaining the social structure of the home. They managed domestic affairs, ensured the continuation of the family line, and were deeply involved in religious practices. Many Viking women were involved in weaving, crafting, and trading textiles, and they had a strong presence in the cultural life of the Norse people. The Vikings were also pioneers of early democratic systems, despite their brutal reputation. One of the most interesting aspects of Viking society was their approach to justice and conflict resolution. The Thing, or assembly, was an early form of democracy, where free men, including the Carls, gathered to settle disputes, make laws, and elect leaders. The Thing was a sacred space where people could voice their opinions and seek justice, often in front of a crowd. The Viking system of justice was often based on honor and reputation. Rather than relying on a formal legal system like we have today, the Vikings followed a system of blood feuds and reparations. If someone was wronged, they could seek justice through direct retribution, either through a duel or by taking matters to the Thing. In some cases, the punishment for a crime could be a financial settlement or the payment of blood money to settle the issue without further violence. Viking warriors were equipped with a variety of weapons, each designed for specific types of battle. The sword was the most prestigious weapon of the Viking warrior, often passed down from father to son. Many of these swords were finely crafted, such as the legendary Ulfbert swords, which were known for their superior Norse metallurgy, and were stronger and more durable than many contemporary swords. Axes were also a common tool of war, as their hacking power made them perfect for close combat, especially in the narrow confines of a shield wall. Viking armor was typically made from leather and chainmail, though wealthier warriors might be able to afford more elaborate armor. The helmets of the Vikings are often misrepresented in popular culture, particularly with the horned helmet stereotype, which is not historically accurate. The typical Viking helmet was a simple, conical design, made of iron or leather, with a nose guard to protect the face during battle. The most iconic piece of Viking gear, however, was the shield, a large, round wooden shield, often painted with symbols or clan colors, which served both as a defensive tool and a means to communicate identity in battle. The Vikings were renowned for their raiding tactics, which were designed for speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. The most famous tool in the Vikings' arsenal was the longship, a type of ship designed to be fast and agile in coastal waters, as well as able to navigate rivers. This versatility made it possible for Viking warriors to raid anywhere, from the shores of England to the heart of Russia. The longships allowed Vikings to appear quickly, raid mercilessly, and disappear before the enemy had time to mount an effective defense. The Viking tactic of hit-and-run raids often involved attacking unprotected coastal villages or monasteries, looting what they could, and then retreating before the defenders could mount a counterattack. The goal was not just to steal wealth, but to strike fear into the hearts of enemies, demonstrating that no place was safe from Viking assault. The Viking war cry was infamous, a chilling sound that could terrify even the most seasoned defenders. With their speed and precision, the Vikings were able to wreak havoc across Europe and beyond. Throughout the Viking Age, several battles cemented their reputation as one of the most formidable military forces in Europe. One of the most legendary Viking raids was the Siege of Paris, 845 AD, led by Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar and his fleet of longships sailed up the Seine River, bypassing the fortified defenses of the Frankish kingdom, and laid siege to the heart of Paris. The Parisians, unprepared for such an assault, were forced to pay a hefty ransom to save their city. This raid highlighted the Viking ability to attack far beyond their homeland and take control of vital urban centers. Another famous Viking battle was the Battle of Maldon, 991 AD, where Viking warriors, led by Sweyn Forkbeard, defeated the Anglo-Saxon army. This battle demonstrated the effectiveness of Viking hit-and-run tactics and their ability to break through traditional Anglo-Saxon shield formations. The battle's aftermath saw the Viking warriors plunder and take control of significant portions of England, including the Danelaw, further establishing Viking dominance over the British Isles. The figure of Ragnar Lothbrok has become one of the most famous in Viking history, but distinguishing the man from the legend is no easy task. Known as one of the greatest Viking chieftains and warriors, Ragnar's life is steeped in myth, much of which was immortalized in sagas and oral tradition. According to the sagas, Ragnar was a fearless raider who struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, particularly during his infamous raid on Paris in 845 AD. He was said to have been captured by the Frankish king, Charles the Bald, and thrown into a pit of snakes, where he met a heroic death. But scholars debate the truth behind this story. Though much of Ragnar's life has been mythologized, it is clear that he was a significant figure in the Viking raids during the early Viking Age. The Ragnar saga blends historical events with legendary elements, and even today, it's hard to separate fact from fiction when discussing his life and achievements. Whether he existed as a single individual or as a composite of several Viking leaders, Ragnar Lothbrok's legend continues to inspire stories, books, and television series that capture the imagination of audiences worldwide. One of the last great Viking kings was Harald Hardrada, often referred to as the last Viking king. Harald's life and career embody the culmination of Viking ambitions in the early Middle Ages. Born in Norway in 1015, Harald was a remarkable warrior who fought in the Byzantine Empire as part of the Varangian Guard before returning to Scandinavia to claim the throne of Norway. His military career was legendary, and his ambitions knew no bounds. In 1066, Harald made his bid to conquer England, but his forces were defeated by the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Harold's invasion of England is often considered one of the last major acts of Viking expansion. His death at Stamford Bridge marked the end of an era for the Vikings, as it was followed shortly by the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Although Harold's reign in Norway had been marked by bold efforts to strengthen his kingdom, his defeat symbolized the end of Viking dominance and the rise of more centralized and organized kingdoms in Europe. While Ragnar and Harald Hardrada are the most famous Viking leaders, there were many other powerful figures in Viking history who shaped the fate of Northern Europe. Svein Forkbeard was one such leader who became the king of both Denmark and England. Svein's son, Nut the Great, is another towering figure, known for consolidating the North Sea Empire, which included England, Denmark, Norway, and parts of Sweden. Nut's rule was a significant moment in Viking history, as he managed to bring stability and order to the lands under his control, bridging the gap between Viking and Anglo-Saxon cultures. Olaf Tryggvason, another important Viking king, was instrumental in the Christianization of Norway. Olaf's reign is remembered for his intense and often violent attempts to convert Norwegians to Christianity, using force when persuasion failed. His efforts to bring Christianity to the Viking world marked a dramatic shift in the Viking Age, as the Old Norse gods were slowly replaced by the Christian faith. The most significant and well-known area of Viking expansion was the British Isles. The Lindisfarne raid in 793 AD is often considered the true beginning of the Viking Age. The Vikings, who had been raiding for centuries, struck with unprecedented ferocity against the rich and defenseless monasteries of the British Isles. The Lindisfarne Monastery, a center of Christian learning, became the first of many raids that saw monks slaughtered and treasures looted. After the Lindisfarne raid, Vikings began to expand their presence across the British Isles. Scotland, Ireland, and Wales became frequent targets of Viking raids. Over time, they established settlements in York, Dublin, and other coastal cities. These cities became critical strongholds of Viking power, where Norse culture thrived alongside local traditions. Vikings established a culture of trade and commerce alongside their raids, influencing the region in profound ways. The Danelaw refers to the portion of England that came under Viking control during the late 9th and early 10th centuries. It was an area where Viking customs, laws, and governance dominated. In fact, much of modern-day England still retains elements of Viking influence in language, place names, and even in certain cultural practices. While the Viking expansion in the West is the most famous, the Vikings also ventured east, where they played a key role in the formation of Kievan Rus', a precursor to modern-day Russia and Ukraine. These Vikings, known as the Varangians, traveled down the rivers of Eastern Europe, establishing a series of trading routes that connected the Byzantine Empire to the Baltic. The Varangian Guard, an elite group of warriors who served as personal bodyguards to the Byzantine Emperor, became one of the most famous legacies of the Viking influence in the East. These warriors were highly sought after for their combat skills and loyalty, often earning high wages while fighting in the service of the Byzantine emperors. The Vikings were not only limited to the European and Eastern expanses, they also ventured far across the Atlantic Ocean and reached North America almost 5 centuries before Columbus. The Viking explorer Leif Erikson is credited with discovering Vinland, which is believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland in Canada. Leif's exploration of the New World was an incredible feat, considering the navigational technology and lack of maps at the time. However, the Viking settlements in North America were short-lived. Though the Vikings did establish a colony in Vinland, their presence was eventually abandoned due to conflicts with indigenous peoples, the harsh climate, and a lack of resources. Despite this, their exploration of North America represents one of the most remarkable and ambitious chapters in Viking history. The Viking religion was centered around the worship of a complex pantheon of gods, each with their own characteristics, powers, and stories. At the top of this pantheon stood Odin, the All-Father and ruler of Asgard, the realm of the gods. Odin was a god of war, wisdom, and poetry, known for his sacrifices, such as hanging himself on the world tree, Yggdrasil, to gain knowledge of the runes. He was also the leader of the Valkyries, the warrior maidens who chose those who would live or die in battle and who would then journey to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Alongside Odin was Thor, the god of thunder, who was beloved by the Vikings for his strength and his role as a protector of humanity. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was said to be able to crush mountains and defeat giants, and it became a symbol of Viking might. Thor's role in Viking society was one of protection, ensuring that the forces of chaos, like the giants, were kept at bay. One of the most enigmatic figures in Viking mythology was Loki, the trickster god who was both a friend and a foe to the other gods. Loki's cunning and mischief often led to conflict with the gods, but he also helped them out of tight situations. However, his role in the myth of Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world, is marked by betrayal. Loki is said to lead the forces of chaos in the final battle, which leads to the death of many gods, including Odin and Thor, as well as the destruction of the world. The Vikings performed elaborate rituals and sacrifices to honor their gods, often in a bid to ensure their favor in battle. One of the most important rites was the blot, a sacrificial ceremony in which animals, and sometimes humans, were sacrificed to the gods. These rituals were held in sacred groves or at Viking temples, and they were believed to secure victory in battle, a good harvest, or protection for the community. The most revered place in the Viking afterlife was Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where warriors who died in battle were taken by the Valkyries. Here, they would feast and fight every day, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarok. The concept of Valhalla was central to the Viking mindset. Warriors saw death in battle as an honorable fate, and they believed that by dying bravely, they would be rewarded with a place in Valhalla where they could continue their lives as warriors. The Vikings had elaborate burial customs that reflected their beliefs about the afterlife. The most famous Viking burials were ship burials, where prominent figures were laid to rest in large ships, accompanied by their weapons, treasures, and sometimes even servants or slaves who were sacrificed to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. These ship burials were often conducted with great ceremony, and the ships would be sent out to sea and set ablaze. The Viking Age began to wind down as a result of a combination of external and internal pressures. One of the key factors was the gradual conversion to Christianity. The Vikings, who had once raided Christian monasteries with little regard for the faith, began to be influenced by the spreading Christian religion across Europe. The missionary work of figures like St. Ansgar and the influence of Christian rulers such as King Alfred the Great led to the gradual Christianization of Scandinavian society. This shift drastically changed Viking values, beliefs, and ways of life, making traditional raiding and warfare less culturally significant. Another key factor in the decline of the Viking Age was the rise of stronger European defenses. As Viking raids continued, kingdoms such as England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire began to improve their fortifications, military tactics, and defense strategies. The construction of stone castles and the formation of standing armies made it much more difficult for the Vikings to continue their hit-and-run raids with the same success. The once invincible Viking longships, which had been the hallmark of their military success, were increasingly met with stronger resistance. As the Viking Age progressed, internal divisions and civil wars also contributed to the decline of Viking power. The once unified Norse kingdoms began to fragment into smaller, competing factions, which led to a weakening of Viking strength. Viking leaders, often seeking greater power, engaged in fierce feuds and battles for dominance. The rivalries between different Viking warlords and kings weakened their ability to mount large-scale raids or defend their territories effectively. The internal disunity allowed external threats, such as the Normans or the Anglo-Saxons, to gain an upper hand. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 marks the definitive end of the Viking Age. Led by King Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, the Norwegian army attempted to invade England in a bid to claim the throne. However, the battle was a disaster for the Vikings. The forces of Harold Godwinson, the Anglo-Saxon King of England, decisively defeated Hardrada's army, killing him in the process. The battle was not only a military defeat, but also symbolized the collapse of Viking expansion into England. The defeat at Stamford Bridge was quickly followed by the Norman conquest of England, which further reduced the Vikings' ability to maintain their hold on the British Isles. The Normans, who were themselves descendants of Viking settlers, had mastered Viking tactics, but combined them with more advanced feudal systems, rendering them formidable adversaries. The last Viking kingdom in England, Danelaw, was absorbed into the emerging Anglo-Norman state. Although the Viking Age ended with their defeat and the decline of their raids, the legacy of the Vikings remains strong in the modern world. The influence of their culture, language, and law can still be seen in many regions that once fell under Viking control. Place names across the British Isles and Scandinavia, such as York, Dublin, and Normandy, retain a distinctly Viking influence. In addition, the Vikings' contributions to shipbuilding, exploration, and trade were immense. Their ships, renowned for their speed and maneuverability, revolutionized naval technology, and their seafaring routes helped lay the groundwork for later global exploration. The Vikings' blending of warrior culture and trade created a lasting influence on future empires and navigational ventures. The Vikings were more than just ruthless raiders. They were a people defined by their spirit of adventure, their thirst for exploration, and their desire to carve out their own destiny. From the first raids at Lindisfarne in 793 AD to their far-reaching expansion across the British Isles, Eastern Europe, and even into North America, their influence shaped the course of history. But the Viking Age was not only about conquest, it was about culture, innovation, and a way of life that left an indelible mark on the world. Their societies were complex, with powerful leaders, distinct laws, and intricate religious beliefs that still captivate us today. Despite the ultimate decline of their raids by the mid-11th century, the Viking legacy continues to echo through modern culture. From language and place names to traditions and mythology, the influence of the Vikings remains an enduring part of the cultural fabric of many nations, particularly in Scandinavia and the British Isles. Their technological innovations, such as shipbuilding and navigation, also laid the foundation for future explorers and seafarers. In the end, it is not just their conquests or battles that define the Vikings, but their spirit of resilience, exploration, and adaptation. The Viking Age may have come to an end with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, but the ideals of courage, honor, and determination that they embodied still resonate today. Whether through Viking-inspired films, literature, or even the pride that many modern Scandinavians feel about their Viking heritage, the Viking spirit continues to thrive. It is a testament to the enduring power of a culture that, against all odds, shaped the world in ways that are still felt to this day. The Viking spirit of exploration, resilience, and adventure still echoes in our world today.